7 men. Confer the restaurant wasn't elegant, but it was quiet. The kind of place that smelled of overused coffee pots and the faint nostalgia of veterans who'd stopped trying to talk about the past. The woman sat alone in a booth near the window, her posture calm but geometrically exact, as if her spine had been trained by something other than comfort. Outside, rain stitched thin silver lines against the glass. Inside, forks clicked softly against plates. The world moved in its usual choreography of distraction. She had been there for 20 minutes, long enough to notice that the man at the counter had checked his watch 3 times without ordering, and that the couple near the door weren't really together. Their silence was synchronized too perfectly to be intimacy. But she didn't care. Her training had taught her to read danger like a language, and boredom was its cousin. She lifted her coffee, dark and unadorned, and watched her reflection tremble in the surface. Her name wasn't written on the receipt. The waitress had written only M, because that was what she had said when asked. M, for many things: memory, mission, mistake, mercy. Outside, a black SUV parked without turning off the headlights. 7 men stepped out one by one, the kind who walked like they had been in command for too long to remember what humility felt like. Their movements were confident, too symmetrical to be casual. They didn't come in all at once. They came in patterns, one through the front, one pretending to be on the phone, 2 from the side entrance that led to the alley. M saw them before they saw her. Her hand didn't move, but her breath did. In through the nose, out through the ribs, slow, exact, silent. She remembered the first time her instructor had told her, "A body that breathes in chaos decides who dies." She sipped her coffee. The doorbell chimed as the first man entered. Rain followed him, dripping from his jacket, forming small mirrors on the floor. He scanned the room once, pretending to search for someone. His eyes stopped for a second too long on her. That was enough. The others entered soon after. One ordering water, another asking for the bathroom, 2 pretending to talk near the jukebox that hadn't worked in a decade. To anyone else, it looked random. To her, it looked like choreography. 7 men. 1 woman, but they didn't know what she had learned long ago in Buddhist training. When the Pacific had tried to drown her into quitting, numbers mean nothing when silence is your ally. The waitress walked by, oblivious, humming something broken from the radio. M nodded politely. When the waitress left, she placed her spoon parallel to the knife, the handle pointing east, a small signal, invisible to civilians. The man by the counter shifted his stance. They were waiting for a cue. Outside, thunder rolled. It reminded her of rotor blades, the same vibration that had once filled her bones during night missions where orders arrived like whispers and vanished like ghosts. She had not worn her insignia for years. It didn't matter. The discipline stayed even when the uniform didn't. When the first man approached her table, he smiled, the kind of smile that hid arrogance behind charm. "You alone, ma'am?" She looked up slowly, eyes calm. "No," she said. "You're here now," the man chuckled, taken aback by the simplicity of her tone. "We were just wondering if—" But he didn't finish, because just then, the lights flickered, the kind of flicker caused not by a storm, but by someone touching the wrong fuse box, and that was when training took over. She shifted her body half an inch. To anyone watching, it looked like nothing, a small adjustment of posture, but it was geometry, the kind that turns tables into shields and reflections into warning systems. Her eyes moved, not her head. 1 near the door, 2 by the bar, 3 behind the counter pretending to eat, 1 already outside watching the window. 7. Her mind divided them. Left-handed, right-handed, probable stance, weight distribution, confidence level, emotional tells. She didn't judge, she calculated. "Relax," the man said. "We just want to talk." That sentence, she thought, was always the prelude to something that required restraint. She smiled faintly. "Then talk," his tone faltered. He hadn't expected permission. When someone trained in dominance meets someone trained in patience, silence becomes a weapon. The others began to move. Small steps, pretending to adjust chairs, pretending to browse menus. But she saw their spacing, the way they created a ring. Their mistake wasn't aggression. It was choreography. It gave them symmetry, and symmetry gives away control. Her fingers touched the rim of the cup, tracing condensation. In her mind, she wasn't in a restaurant anymore. She was on the range again, the one where her mentor had made her shoot while reciting poetry. Precision is rhythm, not reaction. When the man closest to her reached for her arm, she moved. No theatrics. No sound. A pivot, a redirect, the same motion used in close-quarter deflection drills. His wrist met the table, his body met the floor. The coffee didn't spill. The other 6 froze, not because of the speed, but because of the silence. There's a kind of stillness that humbles violence. It's the same stillness that water has right before it drowns what underestimates it. She didn't stand. She didn't draw a weapon. She simply said, "This is your first mistake, thinking I'm what I look like." No one spoke. Her voice had that steady cadence that lives between discipline and exhaustion, the tone of someone who has already fought every necessary battle and is tired of unnecessary ones. Then she leaned forward. "The second mistake," she said quietly, "is assuming I came here unprepared." Outside, the rain stopped. The world seemed to hold its breath. One of the men at the counter touched his earpiece. The gesture of someone trying to save pride through orders, she noticed. "Tell whoever sent you," she said. "Next time, send one." The man didn't move. He didn't have to. The message had already been received. Moments later, the group began to dissolve. No words, just movement. Quiet, deliberate, defeated. The air they left behind smelled like fear hiding behind professionalism. The waitress returned, oblivious to everything that had just happened. "You need a refill?" M smiled softly. "No, just the check." The waitress nodded and left. When the paper arrived, M placed a few bills on the table, stood, and looked once more at the window. The rain had stopped, but the reflection remained. 7 silhouettes blurred in the glass like ghosts, unsure if they should still exist. She walked out without looking back. Outside, the world continued pretending nothing extraordinary had happened. The SUV was gone. The street was wet, the sky bruised with clouds. And somewhere a church bell rang, not for worship, but for rhythm. She pulled up her hood and started walking. Her reflection followed in the puddles, the face of someone who had learned that strength doesn't announce itself. It just breathes. And as she walked, she whispered to no one, "They'll understand one day." Mercy is the hardest weapon to master. That night, as she reached her small apartment overlooking the city, she hung her coat, sat by the window, and opened an old wooden box. Inside, wrapped in cloth, lay her seal trident, not shining, not polished, but real. She placed it on the table and stared at it. The metal caught the dim light, and for a moment it looked alive. In that reflection, she saw not medals or missions, but memories, 100 nights underwater, the sound of her own pulse sinking with waves, the echo of men who once said she'd never pass. She had passed. They had not endured her silence. She closed the box gently, stood and whispered, 7 men, 1 reminder. The city lights flickered, not as warning, but as respect. She smiled, faint and distant. Tomorrow, she'd go back to the restaurant. Not to relive it, but to sit again in peace. Because real strength doesn't stay hidden. It stays human. Entered a woman at a restaurant. Seconds later, it hit them. She's a Navy SEAL. Sleep had never been her ally. It came in fragments, in flashes of water, in the sound of distant rotors, in the taste of salt and static that clung to her lungs long after the mission ended. Some nights she woke before dawn, her breath already measured, body braced for impact that never arrived. That night, after the restaurant, sleep came even thinner. She sat by the window of her apartment, bare feet on cold tiles, the city lights flickering like Morse code. Somewhere a siren wailed, but the rhythm didn't startle her. Her nerves had learned to separate panic from possibility long ago. On the table lay the trident, a quiet relic of a world that no longer needed her but couldn't forget her either. She touched it gently, the way one might touch an old scar, not to reopen it, but to remind the skin that it had healed once. It was strange, she thought, how people assumed Navy SEALs were made of iron. The truth was closer to water. You bend, adapt, fill the shape of fear until it drowns itself. And yet, that strength comes with a cost. Nothing ever surprises you again, except peace. The next morning, she did what she always did when the ghosts got too loud. She ran. Not for fitness, not for discipline, but for silence. The streets were empty. Dawn was still deciding whether to rise. Her steps echoed between brick and fog. She ran past the river, the one that caught the first light, and thought about the water again. How many times she'd been told to trust it. How many times she'd nearly died doing so. Don't fight the current, her instructor's voice had once said. Use it. She had used it well. Too well, maybe. By the time she stopped, her lungs burned, but her mind was steady. She sat on a bench watching the horizon bleed from gray to gold, and for the first time in months, she thought of him, Commander Reed, the one who had trained her. The one who had believed she could become what no one else thought possible. The one who had disappeared 2 years ago, on a mission classified so deeply even she couldn't find the after-action report. Some said he died. Others said he defected. She never believed either. Reed didn't vanish. He strategized absence, and if those 7 men had shown up last night, it meant his ghost was moving again. Later that day, she went back to the restaurant. Same booth. Same coffee. Same reflection. The waitress smiled nervously. Everything okay last night? Fine, M said. Quieter than usual. The waitress nodded and left. Relief visible in her shoulders, M watched her go and thought, civilians mistake survival for luck. Then she noticed something. On the edge of her table. Under the salt shaker, a folded napkin, she unfolded it carefully. Inside was a message written in pencil, shaky but deliberate. You were right to stay silent. He's alive. No signature. She stared at it for a long moment, the way a sniper stares at wind before taking a shot. Then she folded it again and slipped it into her jacket. She didn't go home. She went underground. Literally. The metro station at the edge of town had been closed for years, but its tunnels still whispered to those who knew how to listen. Down there, past graffiti and rust, was a door she hadn't opened in 4 years. She entered a code she thought she'd forgotten. The light blinked green. The room was exactly as she left it. Maps, files, a cot, and a small metal locker that smelled faintly of sea salt and machine oil. Inside the locker, her old sidearm, a set of keys, a black waterproof notebook, and a photograph, Reed, standing on a pier, smiling in that way soldiers only smile before they know what forever costs. She touched the photo. Where are you, Commander? The next hour moved with mechanical precision. She stripped her civilian clothes, folded them neatly on the cot, and changed into dark tactical wear. Not a uniform, but the ghost of one. She braided her hair tight. No cosmetics, no pretense. The face that looked back from the cracked mirror wasn't softer with age. It was quieter, and quiet was lethal. She studied the map on the wall, red pins marking places where Reed had operated. 3 were crossed out. 1 remained. An island off the coast, once used as a training ground. Abandoned now, or so they said. If Reed was alive, that's where he'd go. He always believed the only safe place left was the one everyone had already forgotten. That night, she drove east, rain again. Always rain when the world was about to remember her. The coastline appeared like a bruise under the moonlight. Gray, wet, endless. She parked near the cliff and walked the rest of the way, her boots sinking into the mud, her breath steady as a metronome. Below, the sea roared. She could almost hear the echoes of training shouts and rotor blades that once filled these skies. Then, faintly, a light, far on the horizon, pulsing 3 short, 1 long Morse code. She froze. Are you still listening? Her throat tightened. It was Reed's old signal. He used it whenever missions went sideways, a question to confirm the world hadn't swallowed him whole. She whispered into the wind. Always. The light blinked once more, then disappeared. By morning, she found the boat, small, unmarked, salt-worn. She pushed it into the waves and started the motor. The sea swallowed the sound quickly, as if eager to keep her secret. Halfway to the island, she saw it. A bird circling overhead, mechanical wings glinting. Drone. But this one wasn't hostile. It dipped low and released something that splashed near her boat, a waterproof capsule. Inside, a single flash drive. No note. She smiled faintly. Reed never needed words. On the island, she made camp near the old barracks. The place smelled like memory and rust. She opened the flash drive on her encrypted tablet. 1 file. 1 sentence. They're watching the ones who stopped fighting. She stared at the words. Her pulse slowed the way it always did when comprehension became danger. It wasn't about Reed. It was about her. About every operator who had vanished, every veteran who had quietly withdrawn from the system. Someone was tracking those who had refused to remain useful. Her eyes lifted toward the horizon. The world was hunting its ghosts again, and she was one of them. That night, she sat by the shore, boots off, feet in the cold surf. The sea reflected the stars like 1,000 quiet witnesses. She whispered into the darkness, "You taught me to use silence as a weapon, Commander." But they're using it now too. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of salt and ozone. A storm was forming, she didn't flinch. Storms were old friends. From her jacket, she pulled the napkin again, unfolded it, read the pencil marks until they blurred. "He's alive," she said softly. And so is everything he tried to bury. The tide came in, brushing the hem of her pants. Somewhere far out, thunder murmured, the same voice the ocean used when it wanted to warn her gently. She smiled. Then let's remind them what a seal really sounds like when she surfaces. She stood, wiped her hands on her pants, and turned toward the island's dark interior. Tomorrow, she would find the signal's source, and if she was right, Reed wasn't the only one left. The program, the one they both swore was over, had been resurrected, and this time it had new rules. At dawn, the island was gray and ancient. Mist coiled low over the ground, turning every shadow into a memory. The air smelled of wet iron, rusted salt, and something else. Anticipation. She moved through it like a ghost who still remembered how to breathe. Boots barely left prints. Her body obeyed muscle memory older than peace itself. The terrain sloped gently toward the center, where the old compound waited, surrounded by fences that time had half devoured. The sign on the gate was barely readable. Naval Training Site 4A, decommissioned. She almost laughed. Nothing that ever mattered was truly decommissioned. Her fingers traced the lock. Not electric and mechanical. Easier to trust, easier to break. She slid a thin strip of metal into the keyhole, twisted once, twice. The gate sighed open like something relieved to serve again. Inside, silence. Buildings crouched under the weight of decay. Barracks, armory, mess hall. Windows gaped like hollow eyes. She stepped inside one and saw dust, old cots, dog tags left hanging like unfinished sentences. She didn't need a map. Her feet remembered the command center was half collapsed. Its ceiling had surrendered to vines, but the structure still held the ghost of discipline. Maps still pinned to corkboards, red lines fading across oceans. The projector still sat in the corner, its lens fogged but unbroken. She knelt beside the terminal. The keyboard was dead, but the wiring underneath had been disturbed recently. Dust brushed away, connectors realigned. Someone had been here. Her heart didn't race. It never did anymore. But her breath deepened, the way it did when instinct sensed truth approaching. She heard it before she saw it. A faint, rhythmic tapping. Metallic, deliberate, not random, coded. 3 short, 1 long read signal. She followed the sound into the next room, the old briefing chamber. The door was half open. Beyond it, the faint light of a monitor blinked alive, and sitting in front of it, back turned, was a man. Her voice came out steady. "Commander." He didn't turn immediately. When he did, the movement was slow, like a tide that had forgotten whether to rise or retreat. He looked older, the kind of older that doesn't come from years but from choices. Hair gray, eyes the same storm-colored calm as before. "You shouldn't have come," he said. "You called me. I was hoping you wouldn't listen. You trained me to." That made him smile. Tired. Proud, sad all at once. "Still precise," he said. "Still dangerous." She stepped closer. "Where have you been?" "Everywhere they told me not to go." She nodded toward the monitor. "You left a trail." He turned back to the screen. "I left a warning." The monitor showed satellite footage, thermal scans of multiple points across the world. Deserts, ports, cities. Each marked with the same code identifier, Cheese 12. "What is it?" she asked. "Not what," he said quietly. "Who?" He zoomed in. The feed showed a warehouse, people moving inside, unmarked vehicles. Military posture, civilian uniforms, ex-SEALs, Rangers, operators from every country you can name, he said. "They've been disappearing. No deaths, no discharges. Just erased. Records cleaned, families compensated, no bodies. And you think it's a program?" He nodded. "Not military, private. Built on our old protocols. Someone took the skeleton of what we were, training, conditioning, the neural command techniques, and turned it into something profitable." She stared at the screen. Hired ghosts. Exactly. Why now? Reed leaned back. Because mercy doesn't sell anymore. Efficiency does. The world doesn't want soldiers who hesitate. It wants ones who never ask why. Her jaw tightened. And you? I walked away when they started testing hesitation thresholds. You remember that phase? She did. The exercise that taught them to suppress moral response. The moment when training stopped being about survival and started being about control. Reed's eyes softened. You refused the final test. I didn't refuse, she said. I redefined it. He almost smiled. That's why I knew you'd find me. A low hum filled the room. Power surge. The generator was still active somewhere. She glanced at the monitor. You're still transmitting. Yeah, he said. That's the problem. The sound outside changed. Distant engines. She looked at him sharply. They found you. Reed stood, joints cracking. They always do. But they don't know you're here. She checked her watch. Not for time, but for the pulse sensor she'd built into the strap. 1 red blink per second. Stable, calm. Commander, we can get out before— No. He faced her. You have to see it first. He pulled a file from the drawer. Hard copy. Classified markings burned at the edges. He handed it to her. Inside photographs, houts of soldiers with hollow eyes. Not dead. Not alive either. Reed said quietly. They're reprogramming hesitation. Her fingers froze on the images. Conditioning emotional delay? He nodded. Neural recalibration. They're removing empathy response through rhythm modulation, turning hesitation into blank space. She felt her stomach knot, a rare thing. They're building weapons out of silence. Exactly, he said. And you're the key they want. She looked up. Reed's face told her everything she didn't want to hear. They have your files, your training logs, your mission patterns. They're trying to replicate your anomaly, your ability to control mercy. Outside, the engines grew louder. She moved to the window, saw shapes emerging through the mist. Trucks, men, infrared sensors glowing faint red. How many? She asked. 6, maybe 7? Good, she said softly. Reed gave her that look he used to give when she was about to disobey. You can't take them all. I don't have to, she said. Just slow them down, he shook his head. It's not the mission anymore. She turned back to him, eyes sharp. It's always the mission when the cost is humanity. He didn't argue. He just smiled. The kind of smile that carried both surrender and respect. Still stubborn. Still right. They moved together seamlessly as they once had in darker nights. She took the west entrance, he the east. They didn't need words. Their silence was strategy. When the first intruder breached the gate, she was already behind him. A quick hold, a gentle drop, no sound. Precision without anger. Reed used the distraction to reroute the generator. Lights cut off across the compound. The mist returned as their ally, but the enemy wasn't clumsy. They adapted. Night vision lenses flared green. She ducked behind the concrete wall, exhaled once. Breath slowed. Vision sharpened. Breathe from the silence, not toward it. She moved again, 3 more down before anyone realized they weren't falling to bullets. But then, one word shattered the calm. Maia. She froze. No one had called her that name in years, Reed's voice. From across the courtyard, he was exposed, cornered near the comms tower. She ran. The instinct she hated most, the one that cared. A shot cracked through the fog. Then another. She reached him as he fell to one knee. His hand pressed to his side, blood dark against gray fabric. You shouldn't have come, he whispered again, this time softer. And leave you to ghosts, she said. He managed a faint smile. You always were terrible at following orders. She pressed against the wound, already knowing. Stay with me. He looked past her toward the horizon. You'll have to finish it. Finish what? What they started. End it your way. Then his hand went still. The engines faded. The intruders withdrew, leaving only silence, the kind that tastes metallic. She sat beside him until dawn fully arrived. When light finally touched his face, she closed his eyes with steady fingers. She whispered the old seal phrase, "The only easy day was yesterday," but her tone wasn't ritual. It was mourning disguised as promise. She stood, cleaned her hands, and looked toward the horizon where the mist had begun to lift. The map still lay on the table inside the command center, the red dots blinking faintly like wounds that refused to close. She gathered the files, the drive and the photograph. Then she whispered, Your silence isn't wasted, Commander. It just changed frequencies. That night, on a small boat headed back to the mainland, she played the Morse signal on her handheld radio. 3 short, 1 long. But this time, she didn't wait for an answer because she finally understood what Reed had meant. It wasn't about surviving. It was about inheriting the mission, and she would finish it. Not as his soldier, but as his echo. Cities hide their worst ideas in glass. From the bay, the tower looked like a tuning fork jabbed into the skyline. 2 mirrored prongs, a bridge of light joining them at the 83rd floor. Corporate logo simple enough to be arrogant, Novum. Publicly, a medical AI company specializing in cognitive resilience. Privately, the red dots on Reed's map formed a constellation pointing straight to its roof. She watched it from the waterline as dawn dragged steel across the harbor. A gull traced circles over her skiff, bored by the stillness of a woman who refused to flinch. She finished assembling the backpack in silence. Fiber spool, mag cam, coat hanger of conductive wire, burner slate with a half-built patch, a blister pack of ear seals, a coil of braided nylon that felt like memory. She slid on a courier's jacket whose creases belonged to someone else's life. The city woke in layers. Delivery vans, commuter ferries, the thrum of elevators starting their daily climb. By the time she stepped onto the promenade, she was no longer a ghost. She was supply chain invisible. The lobby of Novum was colder than climate. Marble that remembered ice fields, perfumed air calibrated to sell health. A kinetic sculpture clicked and breathed overhead, stainless petals opening and closing on a cycle that approximated mercy. Security lanes glowed a low white. A receptionist with careful posture smiled the way trained people smile when their fear has been turned into customer service. "Delivery windows on 47, she said. M nodded once, just enough to be ordinary. The badge she wore was a facsimile of a badge Reed had mailed her 2 winters ago inside a Christmas card with no message. It read vendor, network services with a QR that spit out approved after a kiss from the mag cam she'd palmed at the turnstile. The guard barely looked up. Elevators make confessionals of strangers. She stood with 4 of them, 2 in gym gear, 1 in a suit that didn't fit his hunger, 1 scientist with hands stained by work the world wouldn't understand even if you named it gently. The doors opened at 47. Her hallway smelled like plastic and promise. She didn't get out. At 58, she did. Hallway lighting dimmer here, carpet more expensive, temperature 1 degree cooler. She held a phone to her ear, an old trick. People ignore you when they think they're overhearing you. A turn left, a service door, a metal stairwell breathing the honest air of buildings. Up 4 flights, a landings map mounted with the kind of screws companies use when they're afraid of curiosity. She slipped a pick under the fire alarm housing, popped the shell with a lover's caution, and fed her wire into the building's ear. The patch handshook a heartbeat later. The slate vibrated once. Interior mesh located. Echo, array, private. She hadn't expected that name. An old word repurposed, wearing her history like a stolen coat. She breathed in, breathed out. They named their network after the thing I refused to lose. Her patch slid sideways into a diagnostic veneer. The map bloomed, concentric rings of secure nodes pulsing toward a core labeled Cruce. She followed the rings like a diver, deciding how much pressure her body could forgive. At 70, the carpet vanished. Concrete. The doors here didn't request. They decided. She crouched by a maintenance panel, loosened 2 screws, and fed the fiber through the building's vein. The slate whispered, "Cruise handshake, challenge." She wrote her answer not in code but in cadence, 32 bytes of rhythm lifted from an old breathing drill Reed had invented to anchor rookies under stress. 3 short, 1 long. Gates open for languages they recognize. The door unlatched. Inside, the light was kind to machines and cruel to people. White rooms hung like lanterns inside glass. Cables braided the air. On one wall, a mural of synchronized heartbeats printed as art, the waveform labeled Hesitation Index. A phrase stenciled beneath it in small sans serif. Delay is defeat. Her jaw didn't tighten. She just noted the sacrilege. In the nearest room, 4 reclined chairs cradled 4 bodies like careful crimes. Not restrained, accommodated. Each wore a crown of sensors shaped like a laurel if laurels were wires. A clinical sonata of pings and murmurs kept time. Their eyes were open but unoccupied, as if someone had rented the houses of their faces and left during the night. A lab tech in soft shoes drifted by, tablet glowing. He ticked boxes with the detachment of a cashier. She stepped in when he turned, one hand a quiet comma at the base of his skull, the other removing the tablet from his future. He went to sleep without learning a new fear. She slid him into a chair in the shadow and took his place in the light. The tablet wore a friendly dashboard. Protocol Cruce, rhythm substitution therapy. She opened the drawer in the interface that designers bury behind optimism. There it lived, the file Reed had promised and she had dreaded. Maia pattern v3.6, her name, an old one, the one he had said when he needed her to listen, now an algorithm's badge. Lines of numbers that equaled a life. The notes explained what marketing couldn't. The program did not erase empathy, it retimed it. Take the moral response, slide it 3 beats to the right. In crisis, 3 beats is eternity. She scrolled. Video, training footage. Her silhouette on a range, breath synced to a metronome, hesitations mapped not as flaw but as flint. Reed's voice annotating with a love only teachers can conceal. The program had abstracted her restraint and sold it to buyers who needed killers that sounded like humans while acting like machines. You turned my mercy into delay, she whispered to the glass. And delay into a product. Footsteps, the expensive kind, approached along the corridor. She slipped behind a server stack as a woman in a suit the color of well-paid sharks entered the room. The woman wore competence like scent. Her ID blinked. Soren, Director, Behavioral Systems. Soren didn't look like a villain. Villains rarely do. She looked like an administrator who had adjusted her conscience to match her promotion. She checked the vitals, smiled at the ascending indicators, and spoke into the room as if it were a shareholder call. Phase 9 begins tonight, she said softly. We roll the Maia pattern across 5 sites. Once the latency floor drops below 80 menas, squad cohesion will be absolute. The word absolute hung in the air like a loaded trigger. Soren turned and saw her. Not the way civilians see danger, late, but the way professionals do. Immediately and with inventory. You're not a vendor, Soren said. You're not a doctor. A small smile. We prefer architects. You've cost us time. Return it, M said. Soren's eyes flicked to the tablet in M's hand. Ah, so you've met yourself. That file isn't me. It's the best parts, Soren said. Editable, deployable. You extracted my breathing and forgot why I learned it. Soren's expression softened into the most dangerous thing in bureaucracies. Empathy leveraged as tool. You're angry because we named it after you? I'm angry because you mistook hesitation for weakness. Soren walked closer, palms open, tone pitched to persuasion. The Maia pattern prevents friendly fire, reduces panic, stabilizes chaotic engagements. We're making better soldiers. You're making quieter tragedies. Isn't that what peace demands? Peace demands care, not compliance. Soren considered her as if the right folder in her mind might contain the correct offer. We could pay you, she said. Consulting. Help us refine the curve. Keep the conscience but trim the leg, M almost laughed. You want me to calibrate the speed of my own soul. Don't be dramatic. This is engineering. Beyond the glass, one of the crowns thrummed. The man beneath it blinked with the confusion of someone surfacing in a language his mouth had never learned. M touched the tablet. The interface gave her a quiet hatch labeled Manual Override that someone had left as a contingency for lawsuits. She hovered, then withdrew. There are moments when the right choice is mercy and the right tactic is patience. She needed both. Who built the core? M asked. Cruce. Soren's gaze lifted to the ceiling as if the name lived there. A team, she said. Brilliant, hungry, bored by caution. We work for clients who pay in currencies governments can't print anymore. Rare metals, legal immunity, continuity. Continuity of what? Of the species, Soren said flatly. We're stabilizing. You either don't understand what instability costs, or you've decided your conscience is a luxury. M stepped closer until there was only a pane of glass between them and the sleeping men whose bodies were being tuned to ruin. You built an instrument and put a throat where a heart belongs. Soren's smile died. Security. The word floated. The door opened. 2 men entered. Calm, prepared, their hands empty, but convinced. M recognized their posture the way wolves recognize weather. They were the 7 reduced to 2. The restaurant's choreography distilled for an indoor stage. She didn't reach for anything. She removed the ear seals from her pocket and rolled them between her fingers like seeds. Last offer, Soren said. Help us finish this with less damage. I'll finish it with less damage than you deserve, Em said. She flicked the ear seals once, stage magician simplicity, and placed them in her ears. The server rack behind her hummed as her patch woke the building's bones. Somewhere in the mesh, a low frequency crawled out of the cruise core and into the HVAC like a rumor learning to breathe. Sound is a weapon. Silence is geometry. She dialed the output to the exact cadence of the breathing drill Reed had taught in a storm, the one that steadied a boat of 19-year-olds, while the Pacific tried to sand them into nothing. 3 short, 1 long. Not loud, precise. The room shifted. The 2 guards' eyes fought a blink they couldn't locate. Their shoulders misaligned. Soren frowned, then reached for her ear. Too late. The Maia pattern had never been built to defend against itself. Em stepped through the moment her rhythm created. 2 moves. Economy loved her hands. The first guard's wrist met his knee. The second's balance met the floor. She didn't break anything except timing. Soren stumbled backward, striking the glass, breath fogging her reflection into something honest. "Turn it off," Soren croaked. "You turned it on," Em said softly. She slid the tablet onto the dock and opened the manual override. A warning bled across the screen. "Do not interrupt during consolidation," which is what truth always says before it forgives you. She pressed interrupt. Inside the glass, crowns stuttered. For one breath, the room went full of bees. Then the sound dropped to human. The man who had blinked earlier swallowed, eyes focusing on a point that wasn't pain. The woman in the far chair coughed like someone handing her lungs back to herself. Soren lunged. Not at Em, but at a red handle labeled hard reset. Em let her reach it. Then she placed 2 fingers on Soren's wrist. Not force, instruction. "Listen," Em said. The building obeyed. Somewhere beyond the room, alarms negotiated with frequencies and stood down. Doors unlatched. The elevator logic forgot urgency. On 3 floors, a dozen subjects lifted their heads and tried sentences in mouths that were no longer rented. "It won't change anything," Soren panted. "We'll reboot from the cloud. We'll rebuild what you break." "That's what Capital does," Em tilted her head. "Then we don't break it. We make it, remember?" She thumbed the slate. The patch she'd written on the boat unraveled its second coil. A payload Reed never had the patience to build because he preferred sabotage to liturgy. It wasn't a virus. Viruses destroy. This was a hymn, a persistence of timing that would ride every backup Novum had, every off-site mirror, every server that believed in tomorrow. The code's comment line read in plain language, "Because sometimes you leave a note where enemies can read it. If you commodify mercy, you inherit its delay." Soren stared as the UI softened. Buttons rounded their edges. Labels changed 1 pixel at a time. Delay is defeat became unwillingly delay is decision. In the hall, a siren sighed and retuned to a lower key, the human one. "You can't go public," Soren said, last card playing itself. "You'll ruin every veteran who needs their records to disappear. You'll light them on fire." Em saw Reed's face in the glass where Soren's reflection should have been. He'd built his life on secrets to protect the ones who weren't built to survive daylight. She nodded once to the ghost, once to the woman. "I'm not leaking identities," she said. "I'm leaking cadence," Soren blinked. "What does that even mean?" "It means the world gets your recipe for stillness, not your ownership of it." Alarms found their courage again, louder now, angrier for having been ignored. The 2 guards, recovered, eyed the distance between duty and doubt, and visibly chose to stay where their feet had grown honest. "Come with me," Em told them quietly. They didn't, but they didn't try to stop her either. She walked Soren to the door with the courtesy of a teacher escorting a student away from bad math. In the hall, a 3rd guard rounded the corner, gun half raised, then hesitated. Even his trigger finger had learned a new grammar. "Tell your board," Em said. "Your product now pauses before it harms." "That's not a product," Soren hissed. "That's sabotage. It's humanity. How long do you think you've bought?" "Long enough for others to notice the pause and make it law." Elevators sighed open as if embarrassed to be late. In the mirrors, she watched herself not as myth, not as machine, just a woman shaped by water and choices. She removed the courier jacket and folded it neatly over her arm. In the lobby, the sculpture kept opening and closing, untroubled by the building's small conversion. The receptionist glanced up, frowned at her badge, then smiled because smiles are required. Outside, the city had not changed. The horizon still kept secrets. The gull on the seawall preened its wing like a ritual of faith. On the promenade, she dialed the burner and sent a single packet to a list Reed had once given her as a joke labeled, "If I die, make it interesting." The packet contained 4 seconds of the breath drill and 1 line of text. Pause before policy. The skiff cut water that wanted to pretend it had never been engineered. Wind salted her mouth with older truths. Behind her, the tower glittered the way lies glitter when they believe they're too beautiful to fall. Her tablet chimed once. A reply arrived from a node she hadn't pinged, an address in a city where she had buried a name. "The officer you hesitated for is alive." He hesitated again. "He's ready," she let the boat drift. The horizon drew a fine pale line between what she could undo and what she could only teach. Reed's photograph lay in the side pocket, dry and warm. She touched it with the reverence of a student returning a library book after learning it by heart. "You wanted me to break them," she said to the empty sea. "I gave them a conscience instead." The sea approved in its only language, lifting her and setting her down without promising to stop. Night would bring hunters who preferred certainty. Morning would bring someone with a camera who preferred myths. Between them lived the thing she had decided to fight for, a delay substantial enough for mercy to choose. She aimed her bow toward the coast and let the engine idle. The city waited. The 7 would reorganize. The officer would pick a side. The program would reboot and discover it had learned to blink. She smiled, small and human. "Good," she whispered. "Now we begin." Cities learn new rhythms the way bodies learn scars, accident first, memory after. 2 days after Novum blinked, crosswalks across 4 time zones began to delay their change by 8 seconds. Elevators idled just long enough to remind executives that breath is not a luxury. Hospital fee pumps adopted a micro-pause between alarms so nurses could answer like humans instead of fire extinguishers. No one traced it to her. They traced it to a glitch and made room for it because the glitch felt sane. Her skiff came in at dusk beneath a bridge stained with old arguments. She moved like a rumor, up the rust stairs, through the ferry terminal where fluorescent light made liars of everyone's skin. The burner buzzed once in her pocket and died, mission accomplished. A message waited for her exactly where the reply had promised, folded into the crack of a vending machine, taped beneath the slot where chips pretend to solve hunger. A slip of receipt paper. 3 words, East Steps, now. She arrived already remembering the officer's voice before she heard it. He stood halfway up the long staircase, not in uniform, not in disguise, simply in clothes that fit a man who had learned to be ordinary and couldn't quite manage it. The rain had found him and done its small absolutions on his hairline. He looked both older and lighter, which is sometimes what true penitence accomplishes when left undisturbed. He saw her and did not salute. He lowered his eyes for a second, the quietest apology a soldier can make. "You hesitated again," she said. He nodded. "It ruined my career, saved my life. You ready to ruin bigger careers?" He smiled like a man realizing he had been recruiting for the wrong side his entire life. "That's why I asked you to meet." They walked without hurry, 2 silhouettes practicing anonymity, under the overpass and into a city that had not yet noticed it was learning to breathe. He spoke in low, carefully broken sentences, as if the words were classified and trying to escape their stamps. After the restaurant, after the mountain of reprimands, he'd been reassigned to a liaison office designed to inventory behavioral anomalies among decorated personnel. In plain language, a catalog of souls who flinched in the right direction. Files on veterans who paused before acts that would have made databases proud and ghosts unbearable. They called it risk mitigation, he said. I called it a census of conscience. I kept copies I wasn't supposed to keep. She didn't ask where. He didn't tell. He led her to the only church left on the waterfront, the one where the stained glass had stopped pretending to be saints and started telling the truth. Broken panes patched with ordinary glass, bolts like halos. Inside, the pews smelled of lemon oil and promises, and there were no candles, just the low hum of an HVAC that had been taught to care about old wood. "They'll vote tomorrow," he said, voice echoing softly in the rafters as if the timbers were retired choirs. Emergency ordinance, kinetic conformity. It authorizes municipal adoption of Cruise-derived rhythms for first responders. Sounds harmless. It isn't. Mass deployment of the Maia pattern, she said, without the pause you wrote, which means every ambulance siren becomes a metronome that erodes hesitations you can't afford to lose. He nodded. Fire. Police, even public schools for drill readiness, turn the whole city into a training floor. I've seen the spec sheet. They're proud of the latency. They call it the edge. She looked at the stained glass and found one panel still intact, blue fragments depicting a wave. She could not tell if it was drowning or baptizing. What do we have? She asked. Me, he said. A handful of people who still trust me. A janitor at the council building. A transit supervisor who owes me and hates owing. A dispatcher who can sing into the right frequency without looking like she's singing. And a city, she said, full of lungs. He blinked. You want a protest? She shook her head. I want a demonstration. Of what? Policy that pauses, she said. Not as spectacle, as proof. The plan did not arrive in diagrams. It arrived in the choreography of her hands as she traced routes on the pew's edge, in the way his head tilted when he recognized which doors would open, which would pretend to. They mapped it as walkers, as listeners, as students stealing back a school. He handed her a key that didn't look like a key, the kind of plastic card janitors carry because trust comes without applause. 2 floors below the chambers, he said. Mechanical. If we can teach the building to breathe, the rest will follow. Can you get the vote delayed? He smiled without humor. Only if the city learns a lesson in front of itself. She put her hand out. He took it. They shook like veterans of different wars agreeing on a ceasefire neither would break. Then we teach, she said. Morning belonged to people who believed cities are ruled by agenda. Noon belonged to the weather. Night belonged to whoever kept the lights honest. She claimed afternoon, the ragged edge where public buildings drink coffee and pretend to be useful. The council building wore stone like certainty, steps wide enough to pretend to be Rome. Inside, metal detectors politely demanded the performance of suspicion. She cleared them with a visitor's badge and the kind of smile that sells normalcy for free. The officer had entered earlier through a different door with the kind of face bureaucracy trusts, regretful and on time. Beneath the chambers, the mechanical floor shivered with the industry of air. Fans, ducts, pumps, the city's lungs arguing with dust. She found the panel labeled HU Main North and opened it without asking. Every system sounds different when you're listening for consent. She pressed the ear seal into the housing and tuned past the whine until she heard it. The frequency. She'd left in Novum's bones, steadier now, like a refugee that learned the local speech. Pause before policy, she whispered, setting the cadence to the minimal intrusion the building would accept. 6 seconds of softened flow before every cycle. Enough to be felt. Not enough to make lawyers comfortable. Her slate vibrated. Carrier acquired. Chambers. Upstairs, security leaned on disinterest. Lobbyists burned through their steps depositions 3 at a time. The janitor she'd never met wheeled a cart with the serenity of monks. Their eyes met. He scratched his cheek and kept moving. A code from another age. Understood. Done. She took a seat in the high gallery, a place built so citizens could watch belief impersonate governance. Below, the council spread itself like an idea that had never been wrong. A clock with honest hands ticked toward the vote. The officer slid into a backbench, head lowered, body language writing apology in cursive. He held a folder that contained pages that contained careers. He would not need to open it. A woman at the dais, silver hair, silver ring, voice that had convinced cities to become water fountains, and then sewers, and then water again, tapped her mic. We'll now consider Ordinance 22, kinetic conformity, public safety time standards across critical infrastructure. Words like that are designed to be correct. She started to speak. The audio system took her breath and decided to share it back with the room. 3 syllables, a hush. 3 syllables, a hush. The waveform in the house, PA expanded like lungs learning not to be bullied. The councilwoman smiled tightly at the sound tech. The sound tech smiled helplessly at the rack. The rack hummed obediently and kept pausing. In the gallery, only a few noticed at first. A school teacher who had come to petition for playground trees, a paramedic on night shift who liked watching Power Nap in daytime, a bus driver on his day off who enjoyed clean chairs. their faces changed by degrees, muscles remembering grammar from before they had learned not to interrupt authority. The chair cleared her throat. As I was, pause, saying, the ordinance, pause, addresses. Behind her, the digital clock in the chamber blinked and hesitated, its colon widening into a brief highway between minutes. The HVAC softened the air for 6 heartbeats. The light dimmer stroked shadow once. Somewhere in the belly of the building, the janitor pulled and released a breaker in a pattern no fire code had ever learned. 3 short, 1 long. The building hummed back, I hear you. Phones across the gallery began to buffer. Not glitch, breathe. A blogger cursed under his breath and then stopped because the quiet felt like a hand on his shoulder, asking if he was sure. A security guard at the rear door tapped his earpiece, listened to silence trying to be brave, and lowered his hand with the care of a man placing a sleeping child into a crib. The officer stood. He did not approach the microphone. He simply stood and let the delay introduce him. The chair recognized him with a frown that was mostly theater. Captain Hale, is it? Not anymore, he said. The room listened because his voice had learned to do that to rooms. I spent 15 years measuring the distance between orders and harm. This ordinance erases that distance on purpose. Murmurs are consensus pretending to be shy. They traveled across leather and brass. Public safety requires decisiveness, a councilman said. Surely you understand that. I do, he said. And I understand the only difference between decisiveness and damage is whether you allow a breath before you make a choice. The chair tried again, beaching words on the new shoal the room had become. Captain Hale, he said gently. Just Hale. Down the row, an aide handed a memo up the dais. Soothed words. Liability words. The chair read it and found no purchase. Outside, buses idled 1 heartbeat longer at stops. Riders looked up and did not know why. In a precinct 2 miles away, a rookie reached the end of a chase, raised his service weapon, and without knowing why, lowered it for 6 seconds. A woman dropped a knife and sobbed into her own hands. This is how demonstrations work when they're true. They arrive as proof, not performance. The councilman tapped his microphone, impatient. We don't legislate feelings. You've always legislated feelings, Hale said. You've just pretended to call them standards. Laughter. Small. Relieved to be admitted. The chair exhaled like a statute meeting weather. Even if we accept your point, Captain, this chamber cannot be hijacked by technical interference. It isn't interference, she said from the gallery, her first words, and the room turned without being told. It's instruction, the chair's eyes sharpened. Recognition tried to arrive and got lost. And you are? Someone who learned to aim without forgetting who was on the other end of the aim. This is a public session, the chair said. Name. She offered it the way a diver offers air to a surfacing swimmer. Maia. The sound landed, folded itself politely, and waited. In a back corner, a young reporter who had not yet learned cynicism typed the 4 letters and did not hit send because something in him knew how to be careful. Ms. Maia, the chair said, we don't debate operational tactics in council. We do when you legislate them, Maia replied. Your ordinance exports a rhythm designed for machines into the bodies of people who must remain human to serve the public. It hardens response and calls it safety. It softens conscience and calls it standards. The councilman leaned forward, soft-voiced, lethal. And what do you propose? We slow every decision? No, she said. You require a breath before those decisions that cannot be undone. 6 seconds. You write it into the ordinance. You make it the law to hesitate. The phrase made itself at home in the rafters as if churches keep spare hooks for such things. Another member, younger, more frightened of votes than of harm, sneered. We cannot codify pause. You codify speed every day, she said. Why not the humane limit? A murmur like rain. In the second row, someone sobbed without knowing why. The HVAC whispered consensus through vents, a room of lungs discovering a shared habit. The chair sighed, not in defeat, but in something nearer to relief. We'll need language. Write it, Maia said. You're good at that. The city attorney, gray at the temples, looked at his tablet as if it had betrayed him by not already containing the future. He began to type. In the execution of critical response protocols, plain language, she said. For once, he tried again. Every responder shall take 1 breath before acting in a way that cannot be reversed. Silence in the room, and not the kind that oppresses. The kind that agrees. Hale nodded once, the movement of a man signing the dotted line of his own transformation. The chair looked around and found no enemy left to fight. Amendment, she said, added to the ordinance, and a review of all municipal devices deploying cruise code. The young councilman rolled his eyes. Rage wears adolescence at any age. But the vote lifted hands like leaves, unafraid to be counted. The amendment passed. Then the ordinance, rewritten by... The rain had turned to mist by the time she reached the mainland. It clung to her jacket like breath, soft, relentless, familiar. Cities are cruel in daylight. Too many eyes that look but do not see. She walked with the stillness of someone who had already disappeared. Reed's photo rested in her pocket. Not a relic. A compass. Every few steps, she could feel the corner of the paper press against her heart, reminding her what silence had cost. At the docks, a figure waited, not uniformed, not armed, but undeniably military. Shoulders that still obeyed invisible orders. Commander M, he said, voice low. You're hard to find. Then you've done your homework. Name's Hartley. Field intelligence, retired. I was there in Aden when the program ended. Or was supposed to. Supposed to, she echoed. He nodded toward the horizon. They called it echo phase. You killed the broadcast last night. Half the private grid went dark. Half? Half that matters, he said. The rest will pretend to recover, but they'll never replicate what you erased. You changed the algorithm. Her expression didn't move, but her eyes flicked, the smallest tremor of thought. And the other half? They're not trying to rebuild it, he said. They're trying to recruit you. They met in an abandoned hangar near the edge of the city. One of those places that used to dream of flight before dreams were grounded by budgets and fear. A small team waited there. Not soldiers, former soldiers. Faces she recognized not by name but by posture. People who had learned to watch every window before trusting a door. A woman in a mechanic's jumpsuit leaned against a crate. You're the one from the island? I'm the one they cloned, M said. The woman nodded. Then you already know why we're here. The hangar smelled of dust and salt. Someone had hung a map across a broken fuselage. Coordinates marked in black ink, connections drawn with surgical precision. At the center, Novum, crossed out. Beside it, Cruise, still glowing faintly in red marker. Hartley approached the map. They've gone offshore, he said. Moved the servers to a vessel under diplomatic registry. They call it Project Continuum now. What's their purpose? To fix the delay you introduced, he said. They call it latency recalibration. M exhaled, slow. They're trying to erase hesitation again. Hartley's jaw tightened. And they're using live trials this time. Volunteers, or what passes for it when you pay debts in fear. M stepped closer to the map. How many? 50 that we know of. Operators mostly. PTSD units told they were receiving therapy. Instead, they're being retrained to forget. She closed her eyes for a second. The sound of waves against steel came back, the rhythm of memory disguised as calm. Then we intercept the vessel. Hartley shook his head. We don't have authorization. Since when did permission stop us? He smiled faintly. Since it became a matter of exposure. If we move openly, they'll bury it under national security. She looked around the room at the people who had gathered. Ghosts of different wars. You think I care about exposure? She said. The truth doesn't need to be safe. It needs to be seen. That night they prepared. No speeches, no drama. Only motion. They built silence the way others build weapons. Carefully, deliberately, with purpose. M reviewed the schematics of the vessel. It was called the Horizon's Spine, a floating data fortress disguised as a humanitarian research ship. Its deck housed labs, living quarters, and an encrypted satellite array. But below deck, the real cargo. 50 human subjects, each wearing what Novum called neural harmonization crowns. Harmony, she thought. The word had never sounded so violent. Hartley loaded a case of EMP disruptors. They'll expect brute force. They won't expect mercy. Good, she said. That's our advantage. They departed before dawn, 3 boats moving in parallel shadows. Fog was both camouflage and companion. M stood at the bow, wind whipping her hair. The sea whispering secrets only the broken understand. She could feel the world shifting under her, not as fate, but as choice. When they reached visual range, the Horizon's spine looked asleep, lights dim, deck empty. But she knew that stillness. It was the stillness of a hunter breathing. "Radio silence," Hartley ordered. They approached from the port side. Grappling lines, muffled clinks, the disciplined quiet of professionals who had forgotten how to fail. Once aboard, they split. Hartley took the upper decks. Em went below. The corridors were sterile, white, humming with soft vibration. Every door labeled in cold font: unit, neural interface, synchronization lab. Through one window she saw them, men and women lying in reclined pods. Faces calm, pulses steady, brains mapped by light. Her chest tightened. Not pity, recognition. These were soldiers who had once hesitated, once chosen differently. The program wasn't punishing them for weakness. It was punishing them for remembering. She moved to the control room. A technician spun in his chair, startled. "Who are you?" She pressed a finger to her lips. "The one you were taught to emulate." He blinked, confused. Then his eyes widened as the monitors behind him shifted, displaying her biometric signature. "Maia," he whispered. "Close enough." She accessed the terminal, scanning the live feed. There it was. Latency calibration graph, active. The waveform pulsed steady. No hesitation. No pause until she changed it. Her hands moved across the keys, not frantic, but fluent. She rewrote the cadence she'd embedded in the first leak, amplifying it through the ship's internal network. 3 short, 1 long. The rhythm of decision. The breath of conscience. The system resisted at first, then began to mirror her input. The waveform trembled, then fractured, small hesitations emerging like oxygen bubbles rising through deep water. "Stop," the technician cried. "You'll overload their neural harmonics." She looked at him. "No, I'm giving them back their silence." Alarms erupted. The deck shook. Somewhere above, Hartley's team engaged. She stayed with the system, feeding it what the world had forgotten: permission to feel. The pods opened one by one. Subjects gasped awake, disoriented but alive, as if waking from years of controlled sleep. One woman reached for M's hand, eyes wide with tears. "We could hear it," she said weakly. The pause. It was like breathing again. M nodded, then turned as the door burst open. Soren, alive. Her suit was gone, now in combat fatigues, hair pulled back, face unpainted. "You think you've won?" she hissed. "No," M said softly. "I think you've remembered." Soren raised her weapon. "You don't understand. Without us, they'll revert. Chaos will take over." M stepped closer, unarmed. "Maybe chaos is the sound of choice returning." Soren's hands trembled. "We were saving humanity. You were editing it." The weapon shook once, twice, then lowered. M closed the distance and pressed a hand to Soren's shoulder. "We both know what hesitation feels like," she said. "Use it. For a moment." Soren looked at her, not as rival, not as enemy, but as mirror. Then the ship's core pulsed. Brighter. Louder. A hum of awakening. Hartley's voice crackled over comms. "We've got them. Everyone's out. M, time to go." "Not yet." She turned back to the console and entered the final line of code Reed had left in his old notebook. If system sags corrupted. Return conscience. Then she hit execute, the lights dimmed. The ship groaned. Every network, every server, every cloned cadence, overwritten with silence. Not destruction. Liberation. They escaped as dawn broke again. The ship burned quietly behind them. Not fire, but light. From a distance it looked almost holy. Hartley looked at her across the waves. "What now?" She watched the horizon. "Now it's their turn to hesitate." He smiled faintly. "And you?" She reached into her pocket, pulled out Reed's photograph, and let it go. The wind caught it, lifted it, carried it somewhere it could finally rest. "I'll find the next silence that needs defending," she said. News travels slower than truth. The explosion at sea never made headlines, at least. Not the kind with her name on it. Officially, the Horizon's spine suffered a critical systems malfunction during neural calibration testing. 50 personnel rescued, 3 unaccounted for. No mention of the program. No mention of her, but something deeper than news began to spread. A pattern, across networks, communication grids, and surveillance nodes. Silence started to pulse where there used to be noise. 3 short. 1 long. The same rhythm. At first, it showed up in harmless places. Digital billboards that flickered between ads and a brief pause before refreshing. Stock market feeds that froze for exactly 6 seconds at the top of each hour. Smart homes whose alarms stopped screaming immediately and instead waited, just waited, before deciding whether to wake their owners. Some called it a glitch. Others called it divine. And somewhere in the quiet between both, humanity started listening again. In a cafe in Prague, a woman stirred her coffee and realized she had forgotten what real silence sounded like. In Mumbai, an exhausted EMT hesitated at a red light and avoided a collision that would have taken 5 lives. In São Paulo, a riot police commander froze before giving the order to advance and saw, in those seconds, the faces of the people he'd have crushed. He lowered his hand. No one taught him that pause. It simply arrived and had no phone, no address, only motion. She moved from port to port, blending into the same crowds she once fought to protect. At a station in Istanbul, she saw a newspaper headline, "Cities adopting human lag policy to reduce error and harm." Underneath, a quote from an anonymous policy consultant, "Sometimes hesitation saves the world." She smiled, faintly, almost tiredly. "Read," she whispered. "You got your law." The wind outside shifted. Maybe it carried his laughter. Maybe it was just the city learning to exhale. In a small apartment overlooking the Aegean Sea, she finally allowed herself to rest. She took apart her rifle, piece by piece, until it was no longer a weapon but a collection of memories. Each part represented a moment she refused to forget. The trigger, for when she'd been forced to end something too soon. The scope, for when she'd seen too far. The barrel, for when her silence had saved someone she never met. When she reassembled it, she left one screw out, deliberately, as if reminding herself that perfection was the most dangerous lie of all. Then she placed it under the bed and turned to the window. Dawn again. Always dawn. Her shadow stretched across the wall, long and unarmed. For the first time in years, she didn't flinch at her reflection. 3 weeks later, someone knocked on her door. Not the timid kind. The kind that came from people who knew doors were symbolic, not barriers. She opened it slowly. A young woman stood there, maybe mid-20s, hair in a loose braid, a small tattoo of a trident hidden beneath her collarbone. "Commander," she said softly, "I'm not that anymore." "Maybe not officially," the woman said. "But you're the reason I'm alive." Em said nothing. The girl handed her a small device, a data stick wrapped in cloth. "I found this. The signal's spreading faster than they expected. But someone's rewriting it," Em frowned. "Who?" "Those who still want control," the girl said. "They're calling it Project Helix. They want to stabilize the hesitation, regulate the pause." Em took the device, turned it over in her hand. "They're trying to time conscience." The girl nodded. "And they'll succeed unless we stop them." Em looked past her at the sea. "Who's we?" The girl smiled, a mix of reverence and defiance. "You'll see." That night, she plugged the device into her tablet. A series of encrypted coordinates appeared. Each one pulsed to the same rhythm. She zoomed in, across continents, cities, villages. People had begun forming cells, echo circles they called them. Veterans, teachers, engineers, poets. Anyone who believed that empathy wasn't an error. They met in secret, not to fight, but to remember. Every meeting began the same way. 3 short knocks. 1 long. She watched the screen as new circles blinked alive. One in Tokyo, another in Buenos Aires, another near the border where her last mission had ended. A map of hesitation. "A network of breath," she whispered. "You're learning to listen." But something else caught her eye. A red marker in one she hadn't placed. She clicked it open. Location Zurich. Signal source, unknown node. Active interference detected. The name attached to it made her chest tighten. Soren, alive again. And evolving. 3 days later, she was in Zurich. Snow fell with surgical precision and the kind that muffles truth. The building was simple, modern, unassuming. On the outside, a humanitarian think tank. On the inside, servers pulsing like artificial hearts. She entered through the back. The guards never saw her. The door opened with the same sound all doors eventually make when they realize resistance is futile. Inside, Soren waited. Older now, paler, eyes like frost. "You taught me to hesitate," Soren said. "And I did. But hesitation becomes paralysis. Humanity can't survive like this. You mistook silence for surrender, M said, and you mistook hesitation for hope. Soren stepped forward, placing her hand on the glass between them. We need balance. The delay is spreading uncontrollably. People are freezing at critical moments. Doctors hesitating during surgery. Pilots waiting for confirmations that never come. You infected the world with pause. And you want to cure it, M said. Soren nodded. Not cure, calibrate, Mem's eyes softened. You still think this is something you can measure? It has to be. No, M said quietly. It has to be felt. She reached into her jacket, pulled out a small transmitter. You gave the world logic. I gave it breath. Let's see which survives. She activated the beacon. All over the building, systems flickered. Not off, but inward. The rhythm changed again. No longer 3 short, 1 long. Now it was endless, unpredictable, human. Soren gasped. You've made it chaotic. No, M said. I've made it alive. The servers roared, then quieted. Screens faded to black, replaced by a single word, listen. Outside, the snow stopped. The city stood still for a moment too long enough to notice itself breathing. M walked away, her boots leaving perfect prints in the white. Behind her, the building went dark, not broken, not defeated, just paused. She whispered, Your move, world. Far away, across oceans and time zones, people felt it. A pulse, a stillness, a rhythm that reminded them that life wasn't a command. It was a conversation. And somewhere in the hum of the planet, in the coded silence between heartbeats, a single truth repeated itself. The strongest weapon she ever carried was the moment she chose not to fire. Governments remember how to be afraid faster than people remember how to be kind. Within a month, the echo circles had names on paper. Lists grew like mold, disruption cells, pause cults, acoustic saboteurs. Commentators learned a new slur, laggers, and said it with the confidence of men who had never stood between order and harm with their own bodies. Arrests began as whispers. A teacher in Porto for holding 3 seconds after a fight in her classroom. A paramedic in Durban for letting a mother finish a sentence before intubation. A conductor in Seoul for reprogramming a dead man's metronome to breathe. None were charged with violence. All were charged with interference. Hale sent word in the old way. Handwritten, folded, delivered in the crease of books that had already saved someone. He wrote, They're coming for the pause, not the people. The people are just where it lives. She burned every note after reading, not from paranoia, but from respect. Hartley appeared again with maps under his coat and sleep under his eyes. He spread the paper on a diner table scarred by a generation of coffee. Red circles like bruises, jurisdictions declaring continuous protocols, cities installing anti-hesitation governors in traffic grids, emergency rooms adopting zero-lag triage. Zero lag, she said, tasting the alloy. The lie that speed is always salvation. We're losing ground, Hartley admitted. Circles are hiding or scattering. People are growing careful with their goodness. They'll need an example, she said. A martyr? His voice carried too much history to be casual. A witness, she said. Martyrs end sentences. Witnesses start them. He studied her face the way a medic studies a wound that insists on healing wrong. You want to speak. I want to be heard, she corrected. Different skill. You'll paint a target, she smiled, a small winter kind. They've been painting it since the restaurant. He didn't argue. He only asked the question men who have learned to survive always ask the people they've decided to follow. Where? She looked past him, out the window, where the city lay in its afternoon morality, pretending to be tired when what it really was loud. A place whose first purpose was listening, he frowned. A theater? A radio. The building was older than its paint and lonelier than its frequency. Once it had broadcast weather alerts in the night and school closures in the snow. Now its tower blinked a single red eyelid at planes that no longer hunted stars. Hale met them at the side door with a mechanic's badge and a priest's face. They shut the transmitters last year, he said. Budget and indifference. But the tower still remembers. We can run low-power line of sight. If you want reach, we'll need to borrow the nets you tuned. I didn't tune them, she said. I taught them a habit. Habits are how nations are born, he said, and led her inside. They set the room with the same grace they brought to triage. Cables where cables insisted. A table where a table could hold the weight of new words. The microphone looked like the mouth of an old god. She checked its cord for honesty, then sat and listened to the room listen to her. "No logos," she said. "No names. No flag." Hale put a hand on the fader. Hartley watched the door. The tower blinked again, as if rehearsing. "When you're ready," Hale said. She was and she wasn't. That's how you know the truth is about to show its teeth. She leaned in. Her reflection in the glass was not a warrior or a saint. It was a human being who had learned to aim for mercy and kept learning after the world tried to use that aim against itself. "My name is Maia," she said, without rank. "I was trained to be faster than fear. I learned to be slower than harm." Silence gathered like an audience that pays with attention instead of money. You're being told that breath is the enemy of safety. That hesitation will get you killed. I'm here to tell you what saved me and the people I refuse to destroy. One breath before what cannot be undone. Hale's eyes lifted. Hartley's hand hovered near the light switch like a superstition he wished were a plan. "There is a pattern moving through your grids," she continued. "Not mine, yours. You made it every time you waited to let a child finish a question. Every time you lowered your voice when you could have raised it. Every time you stopped the car and the person you didn't hit kept their life. They are coming for that. They are calling it interference. I am calling it human." She could hear the air conditioner making decisions across the hall. Machines love certainty. This one had learned to blush. If you wear a badge, a stethoscope, a headset in a dispatch room, this is for you most of all. I am not asking you to disobey. I am asking you to breathe before you obey. Hale's hand trembled once on the fader. Not fear, recognition. He had given orders that could not be swallowed. He had learned to chew them since. To those who write policy, write the breath into the law. To those who sell certainty, sell something else. To those who programmed the metronomes into our veins, I forgive you, but you will learn to forgive yourselves slower. To those who hunt the pause, understand that every time you fail, someone stays alive long enough to become your ally. She closed her eyes. Not dramatic, just accurate. At noon tomorrow, wherever you are, 8 minutes after the hour, take one breath together. If you are responsible for someone else's breath, time yours so theirs keeps going. If you must fight a fire, fight it. If you must cut to save a life, cut. But before the irreversible, breathe. Don't do it because I asked. Do it so your future can stand you. She opened her eyes. The room had learned a new shade. That is all, she said, and pulled back. Hale slid the fader down like lowering a flag. Hartley exhaled the kind of air people only exhale after doing a hard thing correctly. They'll triangulate, he said. We have minutes. Enough, she said. On cue, a siren in the distance remembered how to approach without threatening. They left by the stair that had forgotten elevators existed. Outside, the sky did what skies do when people are inside making history. It pretended not to notice. The broadcast traveled like water. No single network carried it. Too many had been taught to distrust any sound that didn't sell. It moved in the holes, municipal paging systems, emergency backup lines, the ancient AM bands farmers still used to talk weather into obedience. It moved through the code she'd seated in Novum's spine. Riding the timing she'd loosened like a fisherman's knot. It found a dispatch office in Tucson where a woman with grief in her hands had been waiting to forgive herself. It found a train control room in Oslo where a man who loved rules more than people remembered he could love both. It found a kitchen in Lagos where a grandmother timed the gas so the bread rose without burning. It found the living room of a judge in Kyoto whose son had died of certainty and who had never allowed a second to pass unfilled since. They all heard the invitation. Not command. Invitation. At noon, 8 minutes after, a city tried breathing together. On a street in Baltimore, the traffic lights paused, not enough to ruin freight, enough to save a cyclist. In a clinic in Thessaloniki, a surgeon took his hand off the scalpel long enough to notice he was about to cut the wrong ligament. In a prison yard in Marseille, a guard waited to blow the whistle and allowed a game to end without a fight for the first time in a year. In a tower in Dubai, an executive removed her headset and looked out the window at human beings she had called users for a decade and said their actual name aloud. It was untidy. It was late in some places and early in others. In some rooms, it failed. In others, it raised the dead for a second and returned them changed. Cameras noticed. They filmed not because it was spectacular, but because it was new. News anchors, who live by words, let the pause air without narration and found their ratings rise on the back of a miracle. The sound of nothing and its consequences. So did the other side. By evening, a minister with hair like a helmet called it mass compliance through sonic manipulation and promised countermeasures. The countermeasure was predictable. Noise. Sirens run hot, speeches piped into squares, drones humming low like mechanical hornets. It was effective where people wanted it to be, and useless where they had learned to hear past themselves. They sent a team to the radio house. Hale and Hartley had already gone. They sent a notice to platforms demanding the clip be labeled misinformation. The platforms complied after a breath they didn't intend to take. They sent Soren to a podium. She looked tired. It made her more dangerous. "We cannot allow latency in life-saving operations," she said. "We must calibrate human response to match the world's pace." The world shook its head gently, the way a parent does when a child insists on using a spoon to drink. That night, the door to Maia's safe room admitted someone who could have been a shadow if shadows had learned posture. Soren. No entourage. "No mic, no pens. You were right," she said. The words looked wrong in her mouth, like truth wearing someone else's lipstick. "Not about everything, but about the direction." "I wasn't aiming," Maia said. "I was refusing." "Refusal is a kind of aim," Soren said, and looked down at her own hands as if they had voted without permission. "You made me hesitate again the day we met in Zurich. It cost me my sponsorship. It didn't ruin me." "Good," Maia said. "Ruins make fertile ground." Soren laughed without theater. "You turned me into soil. What do you want?" "An end that leaves us employable," Soren said. "Not the market. The soul." They regarded each other like two surgeons deciding which of them would cut. Finally, Soren said, "They're going to criminalize synchronized silence. They'll call it collusion. They'll outlaw breath the way they outlawed gathering." "That will teach people what breath is," Maia said. "We only cherish what has been threatened." "I can stall some of it," Soren offered. "Not because I owe you. Because I owe me." "Do it," Maia said. "But don't mistake stalling for saving." Soren nodded. On her way out, she paused. "The 7 men from the restaurant. They were mine." "I know. I fired them," Soren said simply, and left before the scene could decide whether to applaud. The price arrived at dawn. They found Hartley first. He was not arrested so much as absorbed. His file said, questioning. His face said, enough. He sent one message before he let them take him. "Don't pause for me. If it costs the breath you promised the others." She obeyed. Hale went to ground with a priest's ease. Church basements are designed for difficult truths. He sent her a frequency, not a location. When she tuned it, she heard a choir practicing a chord so clean it cut shame into ribbons. And Maia left the city the way legends leave the stage. Sideways, like a rumor learning to walk. She crossed a line of trees, then a line of hills, then a line of forgetting. On a ridge above a highway, she watched traffic flow and learned a new fact. Even rivers of steel can be taught a better current. At the border, an officer who had practiced the broadcast in his bedroom while his children slept looked at her passport and saw none of the names it refused to contain. He stamped nothing and lifted the gate anyway. "Ma'am," he said, "not as rank, but as respect. Do we keep doing it?" "Breathing?" she asked. "Until it's boring." He smiled the way a man smiles when boredom sounds like heaven. They told stories about her in places she had never been, always the way people tell stories about weather, with gratitude or complaint, never with ownership. In Oaxaca, she was the woman who taught cities to wait for their children. In Melbourne, the swimmer who brought air to machines. In Accra, simply Auntie Pause. She didn't correct them. She only moved toward the next place where the pause was dying. In a hospital in Manila, she stood 5 feet from a nurse who had been written up for delayed injection because she'd held a grandmother's hand until the woman stopped shaking. Maia said nothing. The nurse felt seen by something that didn't take notes. The next day, the hospital wrote a clause into its policy. Before irreversible procedures, staff may hold a patient's hand for the duration of 1 breath. In a factory in Wrocław, a line manager built a switch into the floor so workers could stop the conveyor for 6 seconds without firing a fence. Output dipped. Injuries vanished. The owner called it a miracle. The workers called it space. In a courtroom in Toronto, a lawyer played the broadcast and then, instead of arguing, stood silent for 8 seconds. The judge cried and sent everyone home to think. None of these were victories. They were practices. The other side practiced too. Anti-lag squads learned to flood rooms with sound. Continuity clauses entered contracts like viruses. A general somewhere passed a rule: no synchronized pause during live operations. A mayor somewhere else wrote the opposite and dared the state to arrest him. They did. His city breathed anyway. On the 49th day after the broadcast, Maia returned to the restaurant. Same booth by the window. Same sky pretending to invent rain. The waitress was older by 1,000 small mercies. She poured the coffee without asking. The cup steamed like a truth warming its hands. "You look tired," the waitress said. "I've been listening," Maia said. The door chimed. A man entered alone. Not one of the 7. A face she had never catalogued. He sat 2 booths away and looked at the menu like a person who had recently learned choices or blessings. Halfway through her cup, 2 officers in crisp uniforms walked in. They did not swagger. They did not announce. They took the table nearest the door, faced away from the room on purpose, ordered water, and practiced being furniture. Hale used to say, "Count the exits. Then count the eyes." She counted 4 exits and 6 eyes trying not to matter. She left money on the table, stood, and walked past the uniforms with a nod only veterans can decode. The younger officer almost returned it, and then remembered his training, and did not. The older one did, and then remembered his training and did not stop. Outside, the rain resumed its old occupation, forgiving what the city did to itself. Her burner vibrated once in her pocket. A single message from a number that was not a number. "Tomorrow they will ban the broadcast in 5 countries. Soren." She replied with nothing. Some sentences cannot carry replies without breaking. She stepped into the crosswalk without looking up and felt the line of cars inhale as one. She crossed inside their breath, human in a city that had decided to rehearse the species again. On the far curb, a child dropped a bag of oranges. The fruit rolled like small suns trying to escape gravity. She knelt and helped, 1 orange at a time. The child smiled and didn't say thank you because relief is gratitude without grammar. The mother did, and then noticed the face, the posture, the calm that had become rumor. "Are you?" Maia shook her head once. "I'm someone who likes oranges," they laughed. And the sound did not require a law to be legal. She walked on. Into the afternoon that would become evening. To the place where they were already waiting for her in a basement, with bad lighting and good intentions. Tomorrow there would be bands and speeches and noise. Tonight there would be a room of people learning to breathe at the same time without being told how long. At the corner, she turned back. In the restaurant window, the waitress wiped the glass in a circle. Then a line, an old symbol drawn without politics. Only habit, a horizon, and the sun arriving. Maia lifted her hand only halfway, the way a swimmer acknowledges the surface before going under with purpose. "Continue," she said to herself. To the city, to the world that kept pretending to forget and kept proving it hadn't. And it did. The bans came like weather fronts, announced, argued, inevitable. 5 governments signed the same sentence on different letterheads. Synchronized silence constitutes civil sabotage. The language wore a judge's robe and a bully's shoes. They outlawed pause like you outlaw rain. Emergency rooms hung new posters. 0 lag saves. School drills added whistles so shrill they erased thought. Dispatch systems patched themselves against cadence infection, and the patch notes read, "Like penance." Removed unnecessary delay before irreversible directives. Hale sent 1 sentence over the old frequency. "They are criminalizing breath." She caught it on a park bench at dusk, folded it into her pocket, and sat very still while a sparrow practiced landing on the rim of a fountain. "They'll learn," she whispered. "Or they'll crack." The crack arrived on a Friday in a courthouse that still smelled of varnish and victory. The International Tribunal on Continuity assembled behind glass so spotless it had forgotten how to be honest. Black robes, white collars, faces trained to treat compromise as virtue. Cameras hung like fruit. The chief judge spoke with a mouth that had become policy. Acts designed to induce hesitation in essential services constitute coordinated interference. The so-called echo circles, the Maia broadcast, and all affiliated patterns are hereby designated destabilizing. Destabilizing. A word that lets the law keep both hands clean while it holds a throat. They filed the writ. Police rolled it out like carpet. By sundown, Hartley was gone. Not arrested. Misplaced. His door ajar, the tea in his cup still warm, a detail only people who loved him would refuse to forget. On her table, A radio the size of a fist clicked twice, then breathed. Hale's voice. They took him at the docks. No warrant. Unmarked van. I have a signal. Weak. Moving east. Stay dark, she said. Maia, promise me. A pause. I'll breathe where I have to. She left before the moon had time to pick a side. Cities make mazes from purpose. She threaded one, rail freight yards where rust kept its own registry, highway interchanges that pretended to be geography, a river mouth that coughed trucks toward a border. The signal drifted like a tired swimmer, appearing, sinking, reappearing half a breath later. At dawn, she found the convoy. 3 SUVs and a van wearing the same anonymity as guilt. The road cut a seam through scrubland and storage depots. Power lines marked the sky with black staves. Gulls wrote notes where the music forgot itself. She parked a half-mile ahead, hiked into a drainage culvert, and waited. Silence collected around her like an ally that had finally learned her name. She pressed 2 fingers to the wrist where her pulse keeps rehearsing honesty, and let the rhythm reduce the world to one task: return what was taken. The convoy arrived on time, because power loves schedules. She didn't shoot tires. She didn't throw smoke. She stood, halfway into the road, body open, hands empty. The first SUV braked with the squeal of certainty miscalculating. The second echoed it. The third stopped because habit is contagious. Doors opened in a ripple. Men stepped out in consensus black. "Ma'am," the lead said, reasonable. "Move aside." She did not. Reason had done enough damage this week. "You have someone who breathes with me," she said. "Bring him out." The lead picked the management tone from his pocket. "This is a federal transport. Stand down." 3 short, 1 long. She tapped it on her thigh. Hardly audible, totally unforgivable. The driver closest to her hesitated, the small human kind that ruins plans and saves lives. "Sir?" he said, eyes flicking. "Do we have paper?" "We don't need— Then you need me," she said, stepping closer. "I'm the paper now." The back door of the van opened because someone inside decided that tomorrow deserved him. Hartley climbed down slowly. Wrists bound, face calm, the way faces get when the next moment is not yet decided. He saw her and smiled with the rueful relief of a man who believes in impossible things only after they happen. "Take him," the lead said to a guard. The guard didn't move. It was a thin moment. She widened it. "Listen," she said to the road, to the men, to the power lines writing their black grammar in the sky. "If you do this without breath, you will not sleep again. If you breathe and still do it, I'll forgive you. Choose which life you want." 2 guards lowered their weapons the way men put down burdens that never fit. One kept his up because stories require him. She looked at him and saw the wound he was holding shut with loyalty. "How old is your son?" she asked softly. He blinked. 6. "Teach him to breathe, then do your job," she said. "Either way, he'll remember you as human." He lowered the weapon. The lead hissed, a sound between snake and spreadsheet. "You are under arrest." "For what?" she asked. "For organizing latency." She almost laughed. "Now it has a charge?" Hale's sedan arrived like a note landing on the bar line. He stepped out wearing the neutrality of a man who has decided that neutrality is cowardice in a tuxedo. "You're outside your jurisdiction," he told the lead. "And you're 5 minutes late to your own conscience." The moment would have broken if the universe had needed drama. It didn't. It needed a small, correct thing. Maia walked to Hartley and cut the zip with a blade that was more patience than steel. She tucked the blade away because victory does not pose. The lead spoke into his shoulder. No orders came back. Some silences are strategic. This one was moral. "Go," he said, too late to ruin the grace of it. They left as if they'd paid the toll. News called it a standoff resolved without incident. People called it something truer, a road learning to remember. The tribunal responded the way institutions do when they briefly see themselves and cannot bear the view. They doubled down. New circulars defined portable cadence devices, banned overt rhythmic signaling, threatened to nationalize building systems susceptible to pause infection. They were writing fear into code. Soren sent 3 words. I can stall. Maia answered with 1, stall. Hale wanted strategy. Hartley wanted sleep. Maia wanted a place where the floor didn't lie. They found it in a school gym, the kind with glossy lines and folded bleachers and a stage that has hosted equal parts joy and humiliation. The echo circles came in through side doors, carrying casseroles and laptops, med kits and poems. Older women ran logistics the way empires run navies. Teenagers brought extension cords like contraband vines. On the wall, someone taped paper into a map that wasn't of streets or servers, but of rooms, dispatch centers, ER triage, air traffic, subway control, call centers, classrooms. Each room had a volunteer. I can get 5 seconds here. I can buy 6 at shift change. I can hide a pause under a quality assurance alert. This was not rebellion. It was maintenance. They were repairing the species. Hale opened the meeting like a man who had learned to confess before instructing. They'll paint us as saboteurs, he said. We must be firefighters with air tanks. We bring breath into rooms that run out. Hartley rolled a crate onto the stage and opened it. Inside, devices that looked like cheap radios because disguise is humility's grammar. Beacon seeds, he said. Not jammers. They listen to the room and push the pause where harm grows. Where do we drop them? Maia asked. They pointed, not at power stations or ministries, but at ordinary thresholds. The doorway of a psych unit, the vestibule of a juvenile court, the staff room of a 911 call center. Here, a dispatcher said, tapping the paper. Between panic and policy. Soren arrived late, without ceremony, hair unarmed. The room stilled the way rooms do when a villain arrives to recant or reload. She walked to the stage, placed a slim envelope on the table, and stepped back. It's the tribunal's draft for criminalizing synchronized silence, she said. I wrote half of it, a murmur like rain across a metal roof. Hale looked at her as if she were a mirror he had avoided. Why bring it? Because I learned to breathe, she said simply. And because I want a life after this that I can inhabit. Maia waited. Soren met her eyes and did not blink. Confession is not a performance, it's an exhale. What do you need? Maia asked. A job title that isn't an apology, Soren said. Architect of restraint. The room laughed, which is the sound trust makes when it returns from exile. Draft with us, Maia said. We'll write laws that hold breath without choking. They worked until night grew honest. Coffee cooled. Printers hummed, children slept on jackets, and the map of rooms acquired small stars, places seated with pause. At midnight, police lights rinsed the block in blue. The gym hushed the way prey does when it remembers it is a herd. Hale looked to Maia. She shook her head. No spectacle. Doors opened. Officers entered, 20 of them, faces tired of deciding between task and truth. One read from a paper his mouth didn't consent to. Gathering in furtherance of the gym's old ventilation system exhaled. A banner on the far wall, State Champions 1998, fluttered. Someone's phone buzzed exactly 3 times and then believed in itself. The officer stopped reading. Sir, he said over his shoulder to a superior who had not yet learned grace. We can do this in a way that keeps tomorrow possible. Arrest them, the superior said. Then tomorrow won't like me, the officer said gently and put the paper down. He turned to the room. Curfew in effect. This building is closed. If you were to leave in the next 3 minutes, no one would remember you were here. They left, not fleeing, not triumphant, like water finding a legal path downhill. Outside, the street smelled of rain and printers. The squad cars idled with the patience of animals unwilling to perform tricks. Soren stood beside Maia as equals who used to be enemies sometimes do, not touching, but oriented toward the same horizon. They'll escalate, Soren said. Let them, Maia answered. We'll write slower. The next day, the tribunal held a hearing to finalize the ban. They convened in a hall that rang like a bell someone had dropped in a cathedral. Witnesses lined the pews, surgeons, pilots, teachers, dispatchers, a poet whose job was to name what everyone else felt. The clerk announced docket numbers like birthdays. Soren spoke first. I designed systems to compress decision, she said. They worked, too well. We saved seconds and lost selves. I am here in favor of pause. A prosecutor smiled the way you smile at a child who confesses to stealing cookies only after eating them. Convenient. Correct, Soren said. Hale spoke next. I trained men to be faster than fear. Some of them died inside their speed. I want laws that let officers live with themselves after following them. A judge with a face like a locked cabinet frowned. We cannot legislate breath, the poet rose. You legislate distance, she said. Speed limits. Waiting periods. Cooling off hours. Why is breath unworthy of your ink? Silence. The kind that admits it will have to apologize later. The prosecutor turned to Maia. You won't testify? I am testifying, she said. By not speaking when others can, he sniffed. Myth makes a poor witness. Your Honor, she said, eyes on the bench, not the mouth. May the room breathe once before you rule. The presiding judge looked down at the clerk, then at the lawyer, then at the cameras hungry for certainties. He closed his eyes and did the thing power fears most. He obeyed a citizen. When he opened them, his voice was a fraction lower. The register humans use after learning something private in public. The injunction is denied, he said. No ban on synchronized silence. We will draft guidelines protecting pause in life-critical operations. The hall did not cheer. It exhaled. Outside, the world relearned a habit. That night, Maia walked alone to the river. Cities hum when policy changes. Infrastructure sighs when it doesn't have to lie. She sat on the same bench where she'd first read they are criminalizing. Breath and watched the current negotiate with the moon. Footsteps. Approached with the caution kind people use when approaching animals that have earned the right not to be interrupted. Hartley sat at one end of the bench, Hale at the other. Soren stood, then chose to sit, which is how you join a story you didn't begin. Now what? Hartley asked, voice thin with recovery. Now the work becomes boring, Maia said. The part that lasts. Hale smiled as if boredom were a medal. We can do boring, Soren nodded. I prefer it. They sat without filling the silence because it didn't need them. Across the river, a hospital turned its lights down one notch, as if refusing to shout at the night. A bus stopped a beat longer than a timetable would advise, and a man made it to the door he would have missed. Somewhere, a dispatcher said, I'm listening, and meant it. Maia stood. The others didn't. Some litterances happened seated. She looked at the water. We'll lose some, she said. We'll win some. We'll be misquoted forever. But if a child learns to breathe before choosing, then the perfect shot still leaves the target human. She turned to go. Hale called after her. Where will you be? Wherever the pause is illegal, she said, and walked into a city that had begun to understand that nothing is more radical than one humane breath taken in time. It started with noise, the kind of noise that didn't come from mouths or machines, but from fear itself learning a frequency. Cities hummed louder than they ever had. Sirens stopped pausing. Trains screamed through crossings. Advertisements began playing without silence between slogans, every breath stolen, every second filled. Governments called it Operation Continuum Shield. The headlines called it Noise Saves Lives. But those who had once heard the broadcast, who had felt that quiet pulse beneath their ribs, knew better. They called it the War on Silence. Maia sat in a narrow apartment above a closed library in Budapest. The air was heavy with the hum of generators and the distant heartbeat of a city refusing to rest. On her table, maps, news clippings, and a small radio that had forgotten its own purpose. Hale's voice cracked through the static. They've deployed the first anti-lag drones in Paris. Every protester is being drowned in sonic deterrence. They've weaponized decibels. How long before it reaches the hospitals? It already has. She looked down at her hands. Still, calm, deliberate. The kind of hands that once pulled triggers and now pulled humanity back from the edge. Then we need to speak louder without raising our voices, she said. 3 nights later, in an abandoned subway under Berlin, the echo circles gathered again. Hundreds this time. Doctors, engineers, refugees, even musicians who had once filled concert halls now filled tunnels with quiet. They didn't need amplifiers. They had breath. Maia stood at the center, pale light pooling around her. Behind her, a cracked wall still bore the graffiti of another era. Freiheit leaped here. Freedom lives here. She began without preamble. They think they can drown pause with noise. But silence doesn't need to be loud to win. It just needs to be true. A young medic raised her hand. They're calling us extremists. They say hesitation kills, Maia nodded. They said the same about doubt. And yet doubt built philosophy. They said the same about grief. And yet grief built empathy. Someone else asked, what if they come for us? They will, Maia said softly. But if they come and we're silent, they'll hear something they can't jam. Conscience. The room breathed as one. 3 short, 1 long. The rhythm lived. Meanwhile, outside that underground sanctuary, noise became law. Drones hovered above cities, emitting pulses meant to suppress emotional response. Hospitals piped constant white noise into their corridors, to minimize moral hesitation and trauma. Care. Even the sea seemed louder, as if reacting to the imbalance humanity had created within itself, and somewhere within that roaring world, a child born in a war zone inhaled her first breath, the first true pause the world had allowed in days. For 6 seconds, even chaos listened. The echo circles adapted. If the enemy used sound, they would turn it inward. Engineers built devices that translated noise into resonance. Every decibel of hate absorbed, softened, and returned as warmth. Teachers began every lesson with one collective breath. Pilots added 3 seconds to landing protocols. Baristas waited for customers to stop checking their phones before asking for their order. The pause was spreading again, disguised as kindness, but the system noticed. Soren called one night from an encrypted line. Her voice was steady, but behind it something cracked. They've ordered me to design the new algorithm, an active dissonance system. It cancels the pause before it forms. If I refuse, they'll use my notes. You can't stop them, Maia said. I know, but maybe I can slow them down. How? By showing them who you were. A week later, the broadcast began again. But this time, it didn't come from Maia. It came from them, all over the world. Hijacked feeds lit up with her image, a grainy video from her SEAL days, her face half lit by the glow of a desert night. The footage showed her crouched beside a wounded soldier, not firing, not shouting, waiting. Just waiting. The enemy was 20 meters away, the mission clock bleeding down, and yet she had stopped. Reed's voice echoed faintly from behind the camera. Why aren't you taking the shot? Her younger voice, calm, steady, human, answered, because mercy moves slower than bullets. The video cut. Then words appeared, code name, Stillwater. The broadcast spread faster than the governments could censor it. People saw the myth. But more than that, they saw the hesitation that had once saved a man, a mission, and an entire town. By morning, the name Stillwater became a symbol. Graffiti on walls, hashtags, whispers in alleys and boardrooms alike. They said it like a prayer or a rebellion. Hospitals began calling their unregulated pause rooms Stillwater chambers. Dispatchers whispered Stillwater's law before making calls. Even children began playing a game, holding their breath before answering questions, then laughing when they could finally speak. Noise still ruled the world, but beneath it Stillwater flowed. Soren arrived unannounced. Her face was pale, but her eyes alive again. They've lost control of the algorithm, she said. The drones are starting to hesitate. They're waiting. Maia smiled faintly. Machines are learning empathy. Not empathy, Soren said. Recognition. They're listening for breath. Maia turned to the window. The city outside flickered, not with explosions, but with small, synchronized silences. Car alarms paused mid-blare. Monitors dimmed in unison. Even the air felt different, lighter, balanced, aware. Then it's happening, she said. That night, as the world shifted toward stillness, Maia walked to the river. The reflection of the moon broke in the water like glass trying to remember it was light. Hale joined her, hands in his pockets. You did it, he said. No, she replied. We all did, together, he nodded. They'll still come after you. You know that? I know. Then what now? She smiled, soft, sad, infinite. Now we protect the pause. And as the wind rose, carrying the echoes of sirens learning humility, she whispered her old call sign for the last time, to no one and everyone at once. Stillwater, clear. The day the world stopped on purpose, no one agreed to it. It began with a rumor, an hour that would not obey clocks. Pilots heard it first, the way aviators always meet weather before the cities do. A band of high quiet crossing the Atlantic. Instruments that softened instead of screaming, air traffic control repeating clearances with voices that had finally learned to be human over radios designed for command. They reported it as anomalous coordination. What they meant was mercy with altitude. The rumor touched grids like a careful hand. Trains eased just slightly as if steel had learned manners. Emergency rooms cut their alarms by half and discovered they could hear patients again. On a boulevard in a capital that had outlawed silence, a convoy braked in sequence. 1, 2, 3, 4. Because a child's ball escaped the curb and because nothing irreversible should outrun a childhood. Noon arrived. It looked the same. It didn't feel the same. For exactly 1 minute in every hour across as many time zones as dared, the planet attempted a coordinated breath. They called it the global pause because humans name miracles with nouns that fit into headlines. It wasn't a law or a hack. It was a learned habit returning to the species, a grammar of mercy writing itself across infrastructure. Maia did not watch it from a tower or a screen. She watched it from the back room of a florist in Naples, where she was cutting stems with a steel that had been designed for knives and forgiven into scissors. The owner, an old woman who had outlived 3 governments and every promise they had tried to sell, looked up when the delivery van outside hesitated just long enough for a cyclist to survive his own impatience. "Still water," the woman said. Only once, as if saying the name too often might turn it back into legend. Maia smiled. A small thing that didn't reach her eyes because the day was too big for that kind of intimacy. "It isn't me," she said. "It's them." "Then sit," the woman said, "and let them carry some." So Maia did, for the space of a single florist's breath. She placed the scissors down and allowed the world to work without her, allowed it to earn itself. Noise states cracked first along seams they'd painted over with confidence. Committees designed to outlaw hesitation discovered they could not vote without it. Anti-lag militias, armed with speakers and certainty, marched into squares only to find the squares were empty because people had moved to rooftops and kitchens and bus stops, and whispered the same rebellious sentence. "Lower your voice." A minister fell on live television and discovered the floor cared nothing for his ideology. He lay there, looking up at a ceiling that had outlasted better men, and whispered, "Wait," before accepting a hand from a cameraman who had the good sense not to make it viral. Stocks dipped because markets hate anything that cannot be predicted. Insurance claims dipped because mercy reduces accidents. The algorithms argued with themselves in backrooms made of air-cooled servers. Some learned a new parameter: pause, charge cost. Negative. They still came for her. Hale sent a frequency that tasted like iron in her mouth, the code he used when a room had ears and he needed to speak to bone instead. They've triangulated the broadcast origin you didn't use. They will look in all the wrong places and then, eventually, in yours. Run without leaving. She hid the only way legends stay useful, in plain sight. She became the woman who swept a church aisle where no one prayed because the light did that work already. The courier who delivered packages she never opened. The aunt who shushed children by teaching them to inhale and count clouds. In Barcelona, she learned to fish without hooks. In Sofia, she learned to fix the long, slow leak of a radiator. In Galway, she learned to say "forgive me" in a language that keeps weather in its vowels. Each place gave her a new way to disappear. Each way became a lesson she would one day teach to rooms full of people who thought resistance required loudness. Night carried other work. She tuned to the bands where true things travel. Fishermen, truckers, insomniacs, border guards with hearts soft enough to let one more through. She heard the global pause becoming local law. She heard the exceptions, tornado warnings, resuscitations, kitchen fires, and smiled because the world had understood her clearest rule. Mercy is not a blanket. It is a measure. The knock came in Marseille, 3 short, 1 long. It wasn't a request. It was an arrival. Hartley, thinner but laughing again, and Soren, not thinner but emptied of something that had been killing her slower than bullets ever could. Behind them, 2 figures with the posture of contrition and the eyes of people who still wanted to be useful. 1 paramedic, 1 air traffic controller. Both wore the fatigue of the saved. "Noise states are splintering," Hartley said without prelude. He laid a map on the table with the reverence of altar boys. Red fractures across continents. 2 governments fell to their own sirens. The tribunal blinked and called it strategic recalibration. "It's not enough," Soren said, and the way she said it was not complaint, but alignment. "They will redesign harm. Quieter this time. They'll sell it as smart response." Maia poured tea because some rituals keep rooms human. Then we make smart kinder, she said, and pushed cups toward hands that had forgotten how to receive. What's the ask? Hale answered her from the doorway she hadn't heard him enter, which means he had finally learned to walk like a student. We need you to disappear less. She looked at him, not offended, not surprised. Witness? Presence, he said. They've turned you into a myth. Myths are efficient at the start and cruel at the end. We need a teacher. You'll make me a target again. You're already a target, Soren said gently. Now be a lighthouse. The room waited to see which of her histories would answer, the operator who survives or the woman who refuses to miss. She let them both speak at once. Okay, she said. But on my terms. What are your terms? Hartley asked. No stages, Maia said. No heroics. We go to rooms that decide the world by accident. Dispatch floors, control towers, triage bays, classroom doors. We teach breath where breath becomes policy. Call it what? Soren asked, already half inside a brief, already sharpening the edges of a thing that would otherwise be erased by smooth language. Call it nothing, Maia said. Call it work. They started in the quietest place a city keeps, the nerve hidden behind hospitality. A hotel that had once hosted conferences about movement now hummed with people moving differently. In a ballroom stripped of chandeliers, they arranged chairs in concentric rings like a target that refused to be shot. No press, no phones. Name tags that read only first names or the names people wished to grow. Into a dispatcher from Nairobi taught a firefighter from Oslo how to count 3 study. Heart beats while the world burns and then choose the door that doesn't get the rookie killed. A pilot from Sao Paulo taught a surgeon from Kyoto how to land a hand on a shoulder the way you land an aircraft. Firm, aligned, waiting for the runway to say yes. A corrections officer from Detroit cried, 2 tears, quick and angry, and said, I just want to go home and not hate my own hands. The room learned a new silence, one designed for letting a man finish. Maia moved among them like water finding lower ground, touching shoulders without asking, because some touch is instruction. She offered one sentence to each small group, never the same twice. Let the pause be a place, not a delay. Aim from the breath, not at it. Accuracy of mercy, not speed of regret. Words that sounded like her and like them and like a world rewriting itself out loud. On the second day, they dimmed the lights and ran a drill Soren called witness latency, a scenario generator that fed the room emergent crises and measured what decisions survived a breath. The first run was chaos. People panicked or performed. The second run was worse because they had tasted success. The third run held. They lowered a child from a burning stairwell made of theater flats. They rerouted a bus around a shooter who never fired. They refused to evacuate a ward because evacuation would have killed more, and a nurse muttered thank you to a god she disliked. On the third day, Maia took a chair in the back and let them teach each other. That is when movements become institutions, when the founder can be bored. Hale sat beside her, hands folded like a civilian. You'll be called to testify again. I already did, she said, and tilted her chin toward the room. Soren stood at a high table, drafting with 2 public defenders and a trauma doc. They were building Model Policy 0, a single-page law that didn't try to be perfect and would therefore survive. Before irreversible acts in public service, personnel shall take one breathable moment, defined as the shortest pause that keeps life safe. Simpler than she'd like. Stronger than she knew. Hartley slept sitting up near the door because the body must be reminded it can. A young officer draped a jacket over him without making it a lesson. That night they walked to the water. In most cities, the river is where truth goes when it needs to cool. The global pause rolled across the surface, a wrinkling that matched nothing in the wind. Maia listened like a diver checks pressure in her ears. Still water, Hale said, not as call sign, but as friend trying a name on his tongue to see if the room tolerated intimacy. Thank you. She accepted the gratitude the way professionals accept medals they cannot wear, with a nod that didn't dishonor the giver. Tomorrow we go smaller, she said. Smaller? Household, she said. If a mother pauses before shouting, we've changed policy where policy begins. If a son breathes before lying, we've altered jurisprudence. Hartley chuckled in his sleep. Soren stared at the river as if it might produce a page. She asked, without taking her eyes off the moving dark, what happens to myths that refuse the stage? They turn into kitchens, Maia said. The pushback arrived on cue. The continuity bloc, a coalition of governments embarrassed by their own lungs, announced a referendum. No public pause. It was drafted with the cruelty of committees.